say if you eat a meal on one day, a lovely, like, I don't know, kale salad, lots of whole grains and things, and you're feeling great. But the next day you eat the exact same salad, but it's just been a really stressful day, been stuck in traffic, you're late for work, emails coming out your ears. When you eat that meal, you might start to feel bloated, uncomfortable, and having gut symptoms. And actually it has nothing to do with the food, but everything to do with sort of your stress levels at that point.
Emily, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Emily. No one's going to
Emily's
know
great.
who's referring to who at what point. Yeah.
Exactly. We're both being very polite. So I want to start with opening the conversation up about brain food. What is brain food? It's very much a buzzword of what is good for your brain, what's not good for your brain. But obviously you're going to have a lot more scientific backing in it and a lot more research and understanding of it. So can you just explain it in simple terms?
Okay, yeah, sure. I wasn't expecting that question to go off with. So I think that's a really big kind of question in that realm. Like, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'll just preface everything here. Like, my research is on the gut brain axis, so how the gut communicates with the brain. In terms of brain food, I'd say it's a marketing ploy. Like, your brain is using up energy from the food that you eat, particularly in terms of glucose. So yeah, I've never really had that question, Emily, to be honest. Like, I wasn't really expecting it. I specialize in the food that we eat and how it can support our mood and mental health. And so I really see all food as being able to be utilized for the brain.
I find it interesting that you say it's kind of more towards the marketing ploy, because that was something I really wanted to kind of delve into, and it's very much conversations that I've been having on the podcast of the diet culture generally and the marketing strategies that behind it. And it's kind of crazy when you have these big corporations, companies who ultimately don't see you as a person, they see you as money. They see you as an opportunity for them to sell more, to earn more, to sell the diet plan, sell the food. And even in supermarkets, we can be bombarded with this high protein, low fat, low sugar, sugar free, and the options are endless. So actually trying to navigate that with some sort of a like straight head of, okay, so what do I actually need to buy? And what is it? There's so much strategy behind it. It is actually bamboozling. It's not a word that I actually use often enough, but I feel like it's very fitting in this. How do you navigate that? Is it overwhelming for you as well with that marketing, and the science behind it?
Yeah, I think that it has been a bit of a tendency towards, what sort of sells for individuals. And I think that at the moment we are in a bit of a transition where I see sort of more of like science washing is something that I call it. We've got greenwashing, and I now sort of see it in the space of nutrition in terms of science washing, where something looks evidence backed and evidence based, but actually there's no science behind it at all. And it's fancy words that actually have no meaning at all, whether it says something like clinically tested, and I'm like, that doesn't really mean much at all. Okay, there may have been a study, but does that mean it had any effect? And I see this being utilized a lot, even healthcare professionals, academics, medics being the face of wellness products these days, which is inferring credibility. And I think a lot of the time, like, to be honest, Emily, like, we get bombed. Absolutely, it is bamboozling. But actually, when it comes to my practice, and even I'm in some of the most exciting research, I would argue, in nutrition when it comes to the gut microbiome, and it's incredibly exciting, very complex science. But what that comes down to in terms of putting that into practice for the everyday person, it's nothing new, it's nothing exciting, and it doesn't really sell. It all comes back to kind of the basics.
Yeah, and how boring to suggest, drinking water and actually eating natural foods that come from the ground that might have actually seen the outside, when you could have all of these flashy quick fixes. We can even like sidle alongside the diet pills. It has to be quick, it has to be flashy, it has to be sexy. And it's hard to kind of sell that side of, actually, guys, let's just take a step back. Like, how's your sleep? How are you eating breakfast? It's not popular.
Completely. It's not. And I think it's very easy for us to say, like, if we take my area, which is kind of like the gut brain axis, but the gut microbiome overall, and I think the gut health, it really is kind of like at the epicenter of so much of our health. When it comes to what helps our gut health. It is those pillars that, our granny was telling us and her granny before that. It's things like getting enough sleep, eating like, nutrient dense whole foods, even hydration, but as well, sleep, managing your stress and moving your body. So there's 5 things that I've listed there. And although they seem simple, they are the first things that go out the window when life gets a little bit big for us. We do look for the silver bullet. And I think it's really difficult because it's like, yes, those things are simple, but they're not necessarily easy. It does require behavior change a lot of the time, which is incredibly difficult for a lot of us. And we would much rather someone tell us, oh, there could be a quick fix here and some nice, pretty packaging. And I'm sold. I'm someone who quickly finds themselves, I have done at least, throughout my studies when I was particularly stressed during my PhD, going, oh yeah, maybe I will go with the green powder. That sounds like it's going to solve all my problems in one. I'd much rather do that than try and figure out, okay, where do I need to start setting some boundaries in my life? I'm much gonna, we want the simple quick fixes. Even me being in this area of research, I find myself, vulnerable to it myself.
Do you find it frustrating when a lot of it is having to change your behavior, as you said, and overhaul these things? That almost the culture we live in, the society that live in, because you listed off these 5 things, for example, which are quite basic things in terms of everyone's granny's been telling them for years. It's nothing new. Do you find it frustrating being like, well, it's so obvious, yet it's so difficult to do because our lives aren't actually set up for that? Our lives aren't set up to get that much sleep, to get that much fresh air, to have all of these things.
Yeah, well, our lives here, I don't know where you're based, Emily, but here in London, absolutely not. But if we look, and I think a lot of people that are kind of wanting to kind of improve their health a lot of the time, they're looking to live longer and live well for longer. And actually what the research shows us is when we look at the people that are living the best for as long as possible, in these blue zones, their lives and their society is set up for these pillars, community and eating well and sleeping and moving your body. We just now live in a we've created a society that does not serve us as humans, and now we're trying to do all this biohacking and reversing so much of kind of the issues that we now face, but actually they're sort of man-made out there for us because as humans we evolved, to be outside, to be moving, to be living a little bit closer to nature, for lack of a better phrase. And we've completely constructed an environment now that isn't conducive to that. So we're now looking for all this biohacking, etc. When actually maybe the answers are back, like looking backwards a bit, and how maybe we've got it a little bit wrong.
Yeah, it's very interesting kind of examining it, I guess, from that objective view, because if someone's offering you, well, you can plug yourself into a drip and that'll do the same thing as getting 10 hours sleep. Maybe someone's like, well, I've got the money to pay for it, but I don't have the time to have that. So you can see how it is really difficult and it's really hard to manage. But what's this got to do with the gut? How does
Oh yeah.
this link in?
So if we look at even this idea of how we evolved as humans, being outside in nature. So we as humans, so let's explain what the gut is when people think about the gut, because it is kind of like the latest fad in nutrition, and I've been a nutritionist now for well over a decade. I've seen the diet fads come and go. I'm sick of them, and gut health is kind of the new kid on the block, but I'd argue it's not so much a fad. It's absolutely grounded in science, and it's not going to be a fad because I think it's here to stay for sure this time round, Emily. But when I say the gut to you, like, what do you think? You probably point to your stomach, and people say, like, I've got a bit of a gut on me these days, and it's that kind of area. But actually your gut is everything from your mouth all the way through to the exit at the other end. It's this about 9 meters long tube. So if we put that into context, that's the same length as like 2 giraffes are tall. It's absolutely massive. And okay, nothing too exciting there. We've known the gut digests our food, but why is everyone so fascinated with it now? And why kind of this hold up with kind of like evolution and how we're living, and why is the gut at the center of it? Well, it's not so much the function of the gut, but it's who's living in our gut. So you might have heard of the gut microbiome, and that refers to these trillions and trillions of microbes. So things like bacteria, yeasts, viruses that are living throughout that 9 meters long tract. And as humans, actually, we never existed without these bacteria living inside of us. So we actually evolved on a microbial planet. So the bacteria was here long before we were. We're the invaders, not us. I mean, we're the invaders, not them. And what happened as we evolved as humans and our immune system developed is that we co-evolved with these bacteria. And so for me, it's quite funny that this relationship between us and the bacteria living inside of us is a story that's been there since the beginning of time. Yet we're only now just copping on being like, hold on a minute, could these bacteria actually be doing something for our health? And the latest research is saying, yes, they could actually hold the key to unlock so many of the health concerns that we experience today. But the thing is, there's this idea that we've kind of got this old friends hypothesis where in the environment that we now live in, we're not being exposed to the bacteria that we would have back then. And so we're kind of losing touch with the bacteria that really trained our immune system to begin with. And that's why maybe we're getting more allergies, more autoimmune diseases than ever before.
So why are we
Sorry, that
losing
was a lot of information.
Oh, it's fascinating, and I love how you're just like, okay, let's break it down from the start. Let's get
Yeah.
it out in the open. So why are we losing touch? What's changed in terms of what are
So
we not getting?
sure. Well, we used to be in nature and, as our ancestors were constantly outside. 99% of the time they were outside. And we now see that in sort of like tribal communities around the world, they have bacteria that us in the Western world have never seen. So we are seem to be losing touch with certain bacteria for sure.
And I'm interested in, you kind of alluded to the research that suggests that actually, hold on, this could help us. This could help a lot of the existing, whether you would call them illnesses or conditions or anything that's
Yeah.
going on. Can you give me a bit more information on that? I want to know more.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So our bacteria in our gut, and I said microbes, but the majority of the time I'm talking about bacteria. And when I say bacteria, everyone always thinks, that's a bad thing. That's what makes us poorly. But actually, what we call the commensal or the good bacteria in our gut, they are chatty little things. They're chattier than you and I, Emily. I know we could probably go for hours on this one, but these guys as well living inside of us, they're talking to almost every system and organ in the body, everything from our immune system, our brain, our skin, our lungs, our thyroid, the list goes on and on. But the one I really want to hone in on is maybe the immune system to begin with. So 70% of your immune cells actually sit within the gut. And it's your gut bacteria that train your immune system. So often we just think our immune system kind of just kicks in when we've got cold or flu or something like that. But it's constantly working in the background. And it's your gut bacteria that is really the powerhouse for that. So what your gut bacteria does is from birth, it's kind of like the teacher, right? And the bacteria are the pupils in the class. And your gut bacteria will train your immune system to know what to attack and what not to. So say if you eat some food and then a protein in the food goes into your gut bacteria are going to tell your immune cells, leave that alone. That's completely harmless. It's an innocent bystander. But then say a virus comes in, the gut bacteria being the teacher is going to tell your immune cells, hey, listen up, that's a real culprit. We need to attack that. And if that communication is there, we've got kind of like a good, diverse gut bacteria living inside of us, your immune system is going to function well. However, if that communication between your gut bacteria and your immune cells starts to break down, that's when we could see some issues. So say, for example, the protein comes in from simply a food and your immune cells don't listen to the teacher, being the gut bacteria, and they start attacking that protein in the food. That's when you might have, say, an allergic response, an inflammatory response to a food, and where allergies can start developing. Likewise, if they don't listen and they don't attack the virus, that's again when we maybe get a cold or flu. So that's just one of the instances where our gut bacteria has a really key impact on our immune system and therefore kind of like our overall health. But there's a number of instances now where we see that an imbalance in the gut bacteria so say we have more bad bacteria, things that are pro-inflammatory, have the potential to harm us compared to the good bacteria in our gut. We see that in individuals with even obesity, depression, different gut disorders, colon cancer, they have this kind of imbalance in the gut. So we do see that individuals with certain conditions do seem to, there could be a role whereby the gut bacteria is impacting the development of these diseases. And that could be through the immune system, but other ways as well.
Wow, that's pretty wild. I want to just delve in then to hold on, where's the brain connection with this?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
that. And the mental health side of it and the connection you kind of touched on depression there.
Yeah.
Is it all linked? You know, you think you know
Mm.
the body and you understand it, and then hold on, it's actually all to do with it starts here or it starts here and it's all
Yeah.
connected.
I
Talk me
could,
through.
it definitely is all connected. We talk about physical health and mental health, but I'd argue that, we just have health. I think we always see the brain as separate to the body. And I think this part might blow your mind now if we get into what it really is my bread and butter in terms of the gut brain axis. So I've spoken about the gut immune axis, but like I say, the bacteria, chatty little things, they're also talking to your brain. So what I'm referring to is the gut brain connection, which is the scientifically proven link between your gut and your brain. So you'll know that your brain talks to all the organs and systems in your body, but your gut talks back to your brain. And that two-way communication, actually 90% of it is going from your gut to your brain, not the other way around. And we now even call our gut our second brain. And that refers to actually our enteric nervous system. So within the gut, that 9 meters long tube, you have these trillions of nerve cells. And those nerve cells are exactly the same as the ones in your brain. But obviously, the ones in your gut aren't solving complex maths equations and things, but they do allow the gut to function completely independently of the brain. And via also kind of the enteric nervous system, as well as sort of other nervous pathways like our vagus nerve and the chatty little gut bacteria, we now know that our gut is communicating back to our brain. And that is the way in which it can have various impacts on our mood, but also our mental health. So we see that in if we look at sort of observational evidence, so we take sort of diseased populations, we see often co-occurrences of brain problems with gut problems. So if we take Parkinson's, for example, we'll see sometimes that even 10 years before the brain disease itself manifests, that often patients will have constipation. Likewise, people with IBD are sick, so inflammatory bowel disease, they're 6 times more likely to suffer Alzheimer's disease later in life. We also see that people with depression, like more psychiatric and stress-related disorders, depression, anxiety, they often have, they're missing certain bacteria, these bacteria that are really useful at producing sort of anti-inflammatory molecules known as short-chain fatty acids. So we're definitely starting to see from this research that there is this connection definitely between the bacteria living in your gut and possibly brain conditions. And you might have seen this yourself, Emily, like, IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome, is really common. It's a gut disorder that's actually been reclassified as a dysregulation of the gut brain axis. And what we see in individuals with IBS is that they so IBS, it's can be really, really affect an individual's quality of life, but it's typically can be anything from constipation, bloating, diarrhea. And what happens in these individuals is that their symptoms worsen during periods of stress and anxiety. So their gut symptoms worsen, but also they're more likely to experience poor mental health. And I don't know about you, Emily, but like, say if you eat a meal on one day, you'll be absolutely fine and a lovely, like, I don't know, kale salad, lots of whole grains and things, and you're feeling great. But the next day you eat the exact same salad, but it's just been a really stressful day, been stuck in traffic, you're late for work, emails coming out your ears, and you're just like, oh my goodness. When you eat that meal, you might start to feel bloated, uncomfortable, and having gut symptoms. And actually it has nothing to do with the food, but everything to do with sort of your stress levels at that point.
There's so much that links back to stress, and I feel like I'm not going to go into it right now because there's so much we literally won't stop talking. But when you were saying that, what I was thinking about, and I've kind of been thinking about it recently, if you bought like a pretty expensive car, you're going to want to put some good fuel in it. You might even consider, like, dare I say, putting the, upgraded premium diesel into your car, spending the extra few pounds, whether it's a difference, you don't know that, but you're going to go for it because you want to treat it the best way. You want to treat the engine the best way. And I was kind of thinking, hold on, like, say I'm the only car in terms of my body that I'm ever going to have. We all only have one car, a vehicle of our body. Why wouldn't we want to put the premium diesel in? So whether that is, as we go back to what what's been grown in nutrients, in vegetables, in, you know, protein rich foods and meats, whatever it is. But does this actually matter? You know, like, is it a bit of a luck of the draw situation, or these people who don't have these certain bacteria and now they have Alzheimer's or they have Parkinson's? Where does this come from, or how can we actually address it?
It's a great question, and it is a bit of a chicken and an egg situation at the moment. So, although I've, mentioned those sort of observational data where we do see that in individuals with certain conditions, they have this sort of different gut microbiome, something that we call dysbiosis, where they've got this imbalance in their gut microbiome with more bad bacteria, essentially, rather than the good. But because of the nature of this study design, we don't know sort of which came first. Was it that the gut microbiome did, have a role to play, at least in part, in the development of the disease? Or was it that the disease itself changed the gut microbiome composition? Now, animal studies, which is what we are kind of heavily relying currently on this space, they would suggest the former, that the gut microbiome could have a role to play in the development of these diseases. And one kind of landmark study, it wasn't an animal study, but I will tell you about it. It was called Transferring the Blues study. And it was the first study of its kind that really showed almost a causal link between gut bacteria and depression. So what happened is that they took germ-free mice, so mice that didn't have a microbiome, and they gave it the microbiome from depressed adults. And what happened is when they transported the microbiome of the depressed adults into the mice, those mice became highly anxious and disinterested in pleasurable activities. So it was the first time that we saw really there could be definitely a link here. Now, where the research is now going is saying, okay, if we see these differences in the microbiome, regardless of which way round it went, chicken, egg, whichever came first, if we could intervene and change the gut microbiome composition of these patients, will we see better health outcomes? And that is a really active area of research at the moment in the gut microbiome space. And we are seeing some really promising results for sure.
Yeah,
How it's
that's really interesting. Yeah. Gosh, that there's actually kind of that link of the gut health, I guess, and it's all coming back to what's going on there. Because I think if you address these kind of, as you say, mental health issues, which they are referred to, but again, as you said, it's very much health issues. It can be quite isolated into talk therapy, or
Mhm.
having people supporting you around you. And stress, I guess, is something that is being addressed a lot more, but again, like, it's the $1 million question of how to reduce your stress. And a lot of the time, again, it's the lifestyle that we live in and the culture that we live in, and it's very, very high stress environment that a lot of it is day to day. So it's then tricky to kind of address that, but you're saying, hold on, like, what's going on in your gut? It's not
Yeah.
something that's really often kind of put in there. They might say, oh, look at your diet, but it's not emphasized to the extent which you're suggesting it should be.
No, and I don't think it's sort of widespread at the moment in healthcare at all. People going to see their doctor, a doctor, a GP, over their 10 years worth of training, they will get anywhere between 12 hours and 24 hours of nutrition advice and of nutrition education. And, a tiny section of that is going to be the gut microbiome. But one thing I would say, Emily, is that because the gut microbiome, well, the microbiome in general is everywhere. It's on our skin, it's on the laptop in front of us. Microbiomes are everywhere, microbes are everywhere. And because the latest research on the gut microbiome is so profound, really, in terms of how everything does seem to kind of be coming back to it, it is forcing practitioners and, academics, researchers, scientific and health medical researchers to kind of take a little bit of a step back and think about the body a little bit more holistically. As practitioners and healthcare kind of specialists, they specialize early. They'll take their organ. You've got a heart problem, you see the cardiologist. You've got whatever other problem, you see this person. The thing about the microbiome is that its effects are so widespread we are having, as practitioners, to take a step back and see the body a little bit more holistically, because the impacts are so wide reaching. So I think it is amazing. And even the conversation of nutritional psychiatry is now coming into the realm, which, 12 years ago wasn't even a term. And it refers to the use of diet and dietary supplements as an alternative or as an adjunct to traditional treatments for mental health. And the fact that, this science is about 12, 13 years young kind of says everything. Whereas I'd say like Western medicine, they've kind of always put food as kind of like always kind of at the forefront of things, or at least more natural ways when it comes to health. Whereas we've been very pharmaceutical heavy. And now actually I think the gut microbiome is this really nice intersection between kind of like where East meets West, because when it comes to nurturing your gut microbiome, it comes back to those kind of 5 pillars, which are the basics, which isn't a silver bullet or just a magic pill anymore.
But then often when we do talk about diet and the wellness kind of area of diet, it is very restrictive. It is very
Mm.
health focused. It's an identity in itself. I am plant-based. I am
Yeah.
vegan. I am teetotal. I am this. I am that. And it's very much restrictive. And there's no judgment on choosing to do that. But it causes a lot of stress for people perhaps who are not actually wanting to label themselves, or who perhaps are just navigating it. Or then there's this whole diet culture of 6-week plan, or as you say, all the juices in the world, which are very
Mhm.
expensive and might not work. It's not sustainable. There's all of these different diet plans with diet pills. So actually, addressing the whole food issue and the nutrition issue, it causes a lot of stress. So people, maybe they are saying, okay, I'm going to eat a bit healthier, and then they go into the supermarket and there's so much marketing that they get really stressed and they feel anxious about it. And then it's almost completely worse than if they just ate kind of normal food.
So I agree. And I think my best advice for anyone listening that does feel completely overwhelmed by this space, and absolutely right, I read something, a paper that showed that only 2% of nutrition information online on TikTok is accurate nutrition and health information. So the majority of the time, 98% of the time, it's a total BS, right?
Yeah.
So what I want to say is, when it comes to even the gut microbiome, you can add all your bells and whistles that you want, from probiotics, prebiotics, etc., etc. But the way I want people to think about their diet is like they're getting dressed in the morning, and to put on, your knickers, your top, and a pair of bottoms and maybe some shoes will do you wonders for the day. And then it's your accessories are the things that are heavily marketed at you. So your clothes, your shoes, they are the first few aisles of the supermarket. It's your fruits, your veggies, your whole grains, and maybe like some nuts and seeds. The reason why I say them is because they're really high fiber. And I really want everyone to up their fiber intake as much as possible, because they're your microbes' favorite foods. And then, if you have the expendable income and you're feeling like, you want to jazz it up a little bit and get some nice accessories on, that's when you might want to consider a probiotic or speak to a nutritionist or dietitian to kind of add those things in. But they are not going to be, the complete outfit. And no, and you're not gonna just want to put them on and walk out the door. You need to make sure you've got your outfit on to begin with. And a lot of that comes back to the natural food that we need to eat, and particularly high fiber foods when it comes to gut health. And what you were saying, Emily, about like diet being restrictive, one of the worst things you could ever do for your gut health is having a highly restrictive diet, for sure. Gut health is all about inclusion, not exclusion, particularly of high fiber foods.
Yeah, I remember. So my husband and I lived in France for the past year, and we kind of, we were working a lot, and there was a lot of things going on. We had a fairly simple diet. We would just kind of go in rotation. We were very happy just kind of doing that, whatever. And then we went on a cruise in October with some of my husband's family, and it was a very lavish cruise in terms of food. And the first few days, oh my goodness, my stomach was in pieces. There was a lot of quantity, it was very rich. And I thought, oh gosh, what have I done to my gut? And you do adjust, by day 4 and 5, you're kind of like, oh, this is quite nice. However, it made me think, gosh, have I been too, like, I wouldn't say it was restrictive at all. It was just, normal food, repetitive food. And it was like healthy food in terms of like, there was fruit, there was vegetables, there was like a selection, but it was fairly repetitive. And it made me think, ooh, like, if I'd done that over a 10-year period, would I have actually damaged my gut and my health in that way?
So I don't think so. I would encourage people to kind of shake it up. So when it comes to eating for, well, I always say to people, you're never eating for one. Just remember, you've got trillions of bacteria down there that if you look after them, they'll be sure to make, look after you. So you want to feed them with their favorite food. And their favorite food is fiber. So, as humans, we cannot break down fiber. We do not produce the enzymes that can break it down. And fiber is the backbone to plant food. So, those whole grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, legumes, all your beans and pulses and things. And so, that's what you really want to focus on when it comes to feeding your gut microbes. But your microbes, as you say, Emily, they're similar to us. They can be fussy eaters, right? So there's some that prefer different types of fiber, and you want to make sure you're feeding all of them. And the best way you can do that is by having a really varied, diverse diet of those food groups that I've mentioned. So, not really, I know, trying to be a little bit more adventurous and putting a new plant food in our trolley every week. And I know it sounds simple, but we're creatures of habit. We put the same thing in our shopping baskets week on week, but we do need to shake it up where we can. Maybe not, we don't all need the cruise, but yeah, just, maybe once or twice a week, just add something that's a little bit new, or sprinkle a different sort of seed and things onto our salads. And that can go a long way for sure.
And hey, if you need to go on a cruise, then
Well,
don't use it. Use it as an excuse. Just go for it.
I love that.
Are we too hygienic in this society?
Oh,
Because we can
great.
talk about, hold on, like our previous generations going far back or outside all the time. They're not going to be hand sanitizing every time they, hug someone or anything like that.
So I'm gonna dodge it slightly, but I'll talk about what can impact our gut microbiome. So when we think about our gut microbiome, what we are trying to achieve is like having a rainforest living inside of us. If you imagine a rainforest, this is an ecosystem that is really in balance, in harmony, but also filled with loads of different plants, species, birds, all kind of flourishing together. That is what we are looking for. And, in our analogies earlier, where we're talking about individuals with certain conditions, they would have more of like a desert looking, or I mean, I live in London, I have like a patch of grass outside my flat. They're working with that, very much lacking in diversity. And things that can reduce your gut microbiome diversity are absolutely sometimes being a little bit too clean. It's good to get out into nature. You breathe in microbes from the air, as well as being immersed in nature is not only fantastic for your mental health, and the research is so extensive now on that, but also in terms of just getting a bit mucky from time to time, but also just socializing. I'd love to see what happened to our microbiomes pre and post COVID, because every day when you're interacting with individuals, shaking their hand, giving them a hug, consuming food cooked by others when we're out and about, all of this increases our gut microbiome. Of course, like intimate relationships, a 10-second kiss and you're sharing up to 80 million bacteria with that person. So absolutely, by being very isolated and just not really engaging with society and life, you're not going to be interacting with as many microbes. And I think it goes back to that idea that I was talking about kind of the blue zones earlier, the areas in the world where people are living the longest and living well for the longest. Their whole environment is built on community as well. And when I look at their life, I'm like, it's all the things that your gut microbes love for you to do. And I'm sure you've spoken to experts about kind of maybe the blue zones as well, Emily, but they really manage their stress very well. They live very simple but happy lives. And I think that all goes into the bucket as well.
I think the blue zones, it is really fascinating in that approach, and not suggesting that we all move across the world and, forget the society that we live in and the responsibilities and the cultures that, we enjoy. Like it's home wherever we are. But what are some of the things that you really see as very important that they adapt? Are there things that we can almost bring into our daily lives wherever we are, if we are in London, if we are in a city?
I think so. I read a study the other day that showed even just having flowers in your apartment helped kind of lower cortisol levels. So I was like, sent it straight to my boyfriend. I was like, yeah, I'll have 6 bunches, please. Yeah, I was like, noted. I think there is, but I think it's like going low and slow. Like, again, it's behavior change. And I think we all have these grand ideas to become a new person every single Monday morning, and it's just not going to work. I really believe in the power of small, not only these teeny tiny microbes living inside of us and the powerful impact they can have on our health, but also it is that kind of like tiny little habits that we can do every single day. But I think in terms of like blue zones, and when I look at kind of the happiest people in the world and these kind of things, you spoke about brain food at the beginning, and we've touched on fiber. And I think if I could bottle up fiber, I'd be a gazillionaire by now. There's not a single drug on the planet that can do what fiber does. It can significantly reduce your risk of so many conditions, and even all mortality from all causes, as well as depression. But also like certain, like, in terms of brain food, and for anyone just listening, I have used quotations there, but if we were our brain, if we, majority, like heavily water, if we dried it out, like a third of it would be fat. So, I think we, as young women, we grew up in an era where like we were told Bridget Jones was fat, and we had very restrictive foods of low fat, low sugar, low this, low that. But actually, I think if we could also encourage people not only to eat high fiber, but also like getting in their omegas would be really, really important. So your omega-3s particularly, they are particularly good for your brain, and you get them really from kind of oily fish. And the reason why you want that is that because they convert really well to DHA, and DHA is fantastic for your brain. So I'd say omega-3s, when we look at, the diets around the world where people are living longer, but also polyphenols. So polyphenols are these plant compounds. So they help a plant essentially defend itself against pests, diseases, even sun damage. And we consume polyphenols through colorful fruits and vegetables. And we're starting to learn that they can have, they can feed our gut microbiome, but they can have really powerful anti-inflammatory effects. And some really interesting work coming out on polyphenols and their effect on the brain, particularly cognition. So our thinking processes and our memory and things as well. So to go back, come full circle and talk about brain food again, I think if there was any, it's not these neatly packaged up, I don't know, I see like brain energy balls and things like this. Your brain needs glucose, absolutely. So don't fear carbs, but also, prioritize having some oily fish. Like extra virgin olive oil is also fantastic fat, especially for women. Our hormones, we need them, and hormones are predominantly fat, and people often don't know this, but they're made of fat. And also just getting in as many colorful veggies as possible, because that's, I think, a good start for improving your gut brain connection for sure.
And I love that these are tangible things that you can do anywhere that you are in the world, because I think that when we talk about, the blue zones or the Mediterranean diet, which of course is best when you're eating, fresh tomatoes from Tuscany or on the coast of Spain or wherever, there is that kind of fascination. Oh, well, when I was actually on the Amalfi Coast, I felt super healthy and I came back and my skin was glowing and I felt amazing because you were on holiday. You were also not working, you were also resting, you were in the sunshine, which you could do because you were not working, you were not inside. And a lot of life is structured in that way. And if you move to the Amalfi Coast to the exact town that you wanted to be in and ate the lovely food, which you no doubt could, you aren't going to have that exact same experience because we cannot live on holiday. And if you did, you actually would be really unfulfilled in other different ways. Because if we just live on holiday, then there's no beauty of being on holiday. It's just quite an empty life, which is a different story altogether. But I'll link it back. And there are tangible ways that we can actually apply things to our lives. And it doesn't have to be, right, that's it, I'm overhauling everything, I'm never eating sugar again, don't even mention alcohol to me, and, I'm going to just plant my own food and grow my own vegetables, and that's that, and move somewhere rural and, never never do anything again. It can feel like that, which again will spike our stress probably in no doubt other ways. But the whole like grass is greener conversation is something that I think has been mentioned a bit on social media, of people saying like there's so much fakeness out there on social media. I mean, you literally said about the TikTok trends, which is absolutely terrifying, that it's 2% is accurate. But what actually is good in our lives? What can we change easily? and actually a change in mental view of it if our brains and our guts are so connected. I wonder what that positive outlook, rather than viewing it as a negative, a stress, an overhaul, a failure, dare I say it, I wonder what the impact of that would be as well.
Yeah, it's great because actually, we talk about stress so negatively. But like you say, just enough stress. Like, it's not about flatlining our stress levels. Absolutely not. Like, stress is there, like our cortisol, those hormones, they are there to serve a purpose. They tell us when something is wrong and these kind of things. The problem is we're alerting that system just too much. But just enough stress, and life is engaging. It's motivating. It's what gets us out of bed in the morning, like you say, to live a fulfilled and happy life. And what's really interesting about the relationship between our gut bacteria and stress is that actually, if you have a thriving, rainforest living inside of you and you have an acute bout of stress, we see that there's gut bacteria, good gut bacteria, and the products that your good gut bacteria produce can help neutralize some of the toxic compounds that are produced from stress. So, you are kind of like allowing yourself to be a little bit more resilient from stress through your gut microbiome. But the thing is, if you are then consistently stressed and chronic low levels of stress, it doesn't matter. You can have the best diet in the world. That stress is going to have a negative impact on the gut microbiome, and it's not going to protect you from the consequences of stress on your body. So you can't out diet stress. But I think, to go back to your point of like, what are the small things that you can do? I think it is like, a lot of people that listen to kind of, you know, helpful podcasts like this, that are trying to learn as much information as possible, often they are the people that are doing everything and doing it well. But they often, my best advice for them would be, kind of do less, like take a step back. They'll be here scribbling down the notes, writing down the high fiber, like what are the little things. And oftentimes I feel like, it's our type A personalities, all of you women, I see you, you're doing everything. Actually, maybe it is that you just need to do a little bit less and give yourself a little bit of room to relax. And when it comes to the food side of things, I would encourage you to embrace the notion of inclusion, not exclusion. So, having a slice of cake, go for it. Can you add some strawberries, or, like, I don't know, even some kefir? Does that float your boat? If you like the taste of that, to cut through the richness of the chocolate cake, what can you add that is gut friendly alongside, your other favorite, good for your soul foods, and think with that mindset, as opposed to getting bogged down with every single decision when it comes to our food.
I think on the levels of diet pills, diet fixes, and quick kind of implementations, we then have, okay, let's go with the five pillars and let's, introduce more greens and kind of change things in our diet. And then we have number three of do less. And I think that you have introduced the least popular option that a lot of people will want, of
Yeah.
do as
Yeah.
much. Because that's, again, terrifying in itself, but
Yeah.
often it's taking that foot off the gas and not being as stressed about everything, and stop Googling everything. Oh my goodness, stop Googling everything. And just chill out.
Yes.
Put
Yeah.
your foot
Dr.
down,
Google.
speak to your
Yeah.
neighbour, spend time with your
I think
family.
as a nutritionist, like I always say to people, like, I think you know your body more than you think. Like, as women, I think we always kind of go external, and we don't often have kind of like even body literacy, when it comes to our menstrual cycle or anything. We don't really have the language, and we feel a bit disconnected to our bodies. And I think it's just starting to understand and learn like what our body is telling us. And I think, if you, particularly when it comes to the gut, and don't be afraid to go and speak to your healthcare professional. One of the best ways you can figure out if your gut is healthy is by looking in the toilet bowl. Like, it's not that glamorous, but those kind of things. And don't be afraid to go and talk to your healthcare professional if you are experiencing, consistent bloating and pain and these kind of things. I think as women, we just kind of like cop it, but actually, people should be going and speaking to their doctor for sure.
And if people want to follow you online, Emily, and keep up to date with what you're doing, what you're talking about, and also, work with you, learn more, where should they go?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at the Nutrition Reporter. And I also have my own website, Dr. Emily Pripper, Pripper spelled PRPA.com.
Wonderful. I'll link those below as well so people can check them out. And thank you so much for joining today, Emily.
Thank you. I loved it.